Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Literature Channel. I'm Tim Wilson. This is the third in a series of lectures on Shakespeare's Coriolanus. So let's get right into it. Today, I want to talk a bit about the Republican regime as it's presented in Coriolanus. So Shakespeare's presentation of the early days of the Roman Republic and what are the limits of that regime. So according to Machiavelli, the Roman Republic arose out of chance circumstances, and he distinguishes that from, let's say, the case of Sparta, where you have a wise legislator institute laws and a regime designed to operate as this republican mixed regime. Whereas in the case of Rome, we don't have a wise legislator. We have kind of some historical happenstances that led to the institutions that eventually constituted Rome's republic. And we see the institution in Coriolanus of the tribunate, that third element. So we have the consulate representing kind of a rule by one, a monarchy. So we have that element. We have a rule of a few in the Senate. And then we have the formation of the tribunate that represents the views of the common people. And that institution's founding is represented in Shakespeare's Coriolanus. So for no apparent reason, uh, and it's not in any of Shakespeare's sources, he has Menenius refer to Lycurgus. So this is Act 2, Scene 1. He tells the tribunes, "I cannot call you Lycurguses." So explicitly, let's say, calling forth this distinction Machiavelli makes, which is one of the many reasons I and others think Shakespeare uh, probably had to hand, so to speak, Machiavelli, or had read Machiavelli. So Menenius is pointing to the fact that there's no wise legislator in the Roman regime, and that it is a product of chance. Um, Coriolanus sees that the tribunates are not, or the tribunate as a regime is not created on the basis of a reasoned view of what's good for the regime. It's merely a response to a crisis condition. So the Senate says, okay, well, we got to appease these plebeians who are rioting. Let's give them this institution of the tribunate. And Coriolanus says, in a rebellion, when what's not meat, but what must be was law, then were they chosen. So in a rebellion, when what's not meet or just, but what must be, a necessity, we're reacting to necessary conditions as opposed to what would be just, that's when they were chosen. In a better hour, let what is meet be said, it must be meet, and throw their power in the dust. So I think this notion of the absence of Lycurguses, we could say that there's no, say, wise legislator, there's no wise ruler represented in the Roman Republic of Shakespeare's Coriolanus, is echoed in this famous sequence of the Fable of the Belly, told in the very first scene of the play. So the plebeians are rioting, and Menenius tells this tale of the Fable of the Belly, that the various body parts are revolting against the belly, and the belly says, hey, we just distribute resources here and there to each of your parts, but we are not holding it for ourselves. It is not as though we're hoarding these resources for you. This Fable of the Belly is interesting in that we don't have the representation of the wise, rational capacity of a human body, let's say, in the form of the head. We don't have that present in the body politic as presented in the fable. And what's more is, we could say this fact is also echoed in the fact that there's no place to stand outside the city in the play. There's no outside the city in the play. In the comedies, if we have conflict that could lead to tragedy in the city. So the conflict of younger lovers meeting against an obstacle in the form of the older generation who want to block the young lovers getting together. often in the comedies, they'll go away outside the city, outside the court, outside the community to a green space where the situation will be resolved and this new life will be brought back in the city as a resolution, and marriages will allow for a social institution to bind the lovers. The lovers will be allowed to come together, but within the form of social conventions. Here we don't have a green space outside of Rome. There's no uh, Coriolanus is banished. He says, okay, that's fine. I'll go off and be on my own. And he doesn't need a city. He's going to be an author of himself. He's self-sufficient. But the very next scene we see him is in a city, a different city, a non-Roman city. We don't see him off being author of himself. We just see him go to another city. So we could say that Coriolanus would need to reform his regime into a Spartan type regime in order to align his vision with the community. And he would need to be a wise leader, a wise legislator in order to do that. However, I don't think we can say he's tragic in some respects, but he's not tragic in the sense of being the tragic figure of someone who is wise beyond their means, so to speak. He's not an Oedipus who sees into the truth of things and that this search for truth leads to his downfall. He's not a Hamlet that tries to contemplate the depths of existence, and that this contemplation and search for meaning is part of his downfall. He lacks, let's say, even the introspection of a Macbeth or a King Lear. He's a great wartime leader, for certainly, and in that respect could be compared to a Henry V, but he lacks Henry V's ability to calculate and plan what is best for his ability to rule the community. And this is also seen in the fact that there's a difference between the city at peace and the city at war in Coriolanus. At the beginning, we have the city at war. Coriolanus thrives in that situation. He's by far the greatest warrior you could even imagine, single-handedly taking on a whole city, covered with blood at the end, and getting rightfully the accolades afterwards. But the city at peace that he wants to rule, he doesn't change his behavior for that, and for that reason is not accepted by the community. Aufidius sees this and criticizes his rival's inability to change in that situation from war to peace. He says, to be other than one thing, not moving from the cask to the cushion, but commanding peace even with the same austerity and garb as he controlled the war. So Aufidius, I think, quite acutely points to the limits of Coriolanus's ability to rule in peace. So I think we've touched on this a bit, but I want to talk a bit more about that is the fact that the play's about this kind of changing nature of virtue. So in many ways, the play's about the shifting nature of virtue, and virtue is in many ways what is considered or what is held to be virtuous. So Cominius' speech in Act 2, Scene 2, it is held that valor is the chiefest virtue. Note he doesn't say valor is the chiefest virtue. It is held, or it often seems to most people that the chief virtue is valor. It's not necessarily the case, but that's what many people think. And most dignifies the haver. If it be, the man I speak of cannot in the world be singly counterpoised. So he says, if that's the case, and there's a big if there, there's a big if in terms of whether or not valor is the chiefest virtue. I think in the play we see that in the time of war, definitely valor is the chief virtue, and Coriolanus demonstrates that virtue. He's very useful to the city in time of war. In a time of peace, maybe other virtues should also be at the table, and Coriolanus absolutely lacks those. And Henry V is a play, also by Shakespeare, of course, but written about a time several centuries later, uh, around the year 1400, so before the Battle of Agincourt, 1415, where we have a community stamped by Christianity, stamped by a religion wherein valor is definitely not the chiefest virtue, wherein the chiefest virtues would be charity, uh, chastity, love, devotion to the divine. Um, Henry V needs to awaken the warrior spirit in the English people before the Battle of Agincourt, and um, says in this speech, "If it be a sin to covet honor, I am the most offending soul alive." So if it's a sin, so a couple things, as with the Comenius speech, it's an if question, like maybe coveting honor is a sin according to Christianity, maybe it isn't. Uh, and for Comenius, being in Rome, it's the opposite. Maybe valor is the chiefest virtue, maybe it isn't. So in both cases, there's a question about what is held to be virtuous, but also there's a recognition in Henry V that we need to awaken this love of honor, this love of the warrior virtues before the battle. And just finally, Aphidius says, our virtues lie in the interpretation of the time. So our virtues are what are can be held in a different context in a different time. Those will change. So this notion of virtue and how it's cultivated, how it's perceived, is connected with the role of the mother to some extent in the play. So Volumnia has a very important role in the play, an outsized role, let us say, to what you would think she would have in terms of the actual actions of the play. So the focus on Volumnia and the strength of her character is to some extent focused around the fact that she has cultivated the virtues in Coriolanus that we see in him as an adult. She has purposely tried to cultivate those virtues in him, and in terms of her maternal care and her teachings to her son. She says in Act 1, Scene 3, when yet he was but tender-bodied and the only son of my womb, when youth with comeliness plucked all gaze his way, when for a day of king's entreaties a mother should not sell him for an hour from her beholding, I, considering how honor would become such a person, that it was no better than picture like to hang by the wall, if renown made it not stir, was pleased to let him seek danger where he was like to find fame. To a cruel war I sent him, from whence he returned, his brows bound with oak. I tell thee, daughter, I sprang not more in joy at first hearing he was a man-child than now in first seeing he had proved himself a man. So she uh, tells how she allowed Coriolanus or sent Coriolanus off to war at a very young age, where he distinguished himself in battle and won laurels. And this is attested to in Plutarch, Shakespeare's source as well. It's also interesting that they are raising uh, Coriolanus' son to be just like him. So Volumnia says, he had rather see the swords and hear a drum than look upon his schoolmaster. On my word, father's son, I'll swear 'tis a very pretty boy. On my troth, I looked upon him on Wednesday half an hour together. He has such confirmed countenance. I saw him run after a gilded butterfly, and when he caught it, he let it go again, and after it again, and over he comes, and up again, catched it again. Or whether his fall enraged him, or how 'twas, he did so set his teeth and tear it. Oh, I warrant how he mimicked it, tore it apart. So, so Illyria tells this little vignette of how she watched Coriolanus's son playing with a butterfly and capturing it, letting it go, and then finally tearing it apart. And Volumnia is saying that she sees Coriolanus very much in this little boy. So there's this notion too of, let's say, an excessive martial virtue in Coriolanus, and such an extent that he's not able to moderate it and direct it in the proper channels. So we have a good, let's say, description in Plato's Republic of the martial virtues that would be needed in an ideal republic, an ideal community, of these watchdogs, these guardians, as they're described in the Republic. And Socrates says we would need to cultivate kind of a martial virtue in there, the thumotic character, and that entails loving one's friends and harming one's enemies. Coriolanus, however, cannot distinguish between friend and enemy. His anger, his martial valor is always directed against any oncomers. So he is a scourge to her, Rome's enemies, and a rod to her friends. It's an Act 2, Scene 3. And on this point, I would just remind everyone that Coriolanus says he would fight on any side in order to face Aufidius. It doesn't matter what side I'm on. I'll make my current friends my enemies if I have to in order to fight Aufidius. Of course, in the actual action of the play, he does switch sides, but in order to fight with Aufidius. And I said there's only a couple of little soliloquies that Coriolanus has, and one of them, his aversion to following custom because it's not true, is pointed out in one, and the other one is in how friend and enemy change places, Act 4, Scene 4. So the city needs to cultivate spiritedness. Any city and community needs to cultivate the love of honor, spiritedness, and it needs to keep them within measure. Of course, we see Coriolanus as an example where it's gone out of control, and it also needs to keep the forces of Eros in check and channeled into legitimate directions. And we've talked a bit about in our introduction to Shakespeare how that's the kind of the function of the comedies in a way, is this channeling of dangerous Eros into socially accepted directions in the form of marriage. Here, we don't have a comedic context for the channeling of Eros. We don't have the channeling of Eros into marriage. We have the channeling of Eros into war in the form of Coriolanus, and to some extent Cominius and Aufidius. So Marcius, so this is Coriolanus before he attains that name, Coriolanus, his original name Marcius, and Cominius embrace in Act 1, and it's compared to as he embraced on his wedding day. Oh, let me clip ye in arms as sound as when I wooed in heart, as merry as when our nuptial day was done, and tapers burnt to bedward. So in Coriolanus, Marcius's mind, this his embracing his fellow comrade in a day of battle reminds him of his embrace of his wife on their nuptial day. So also when he's going to visit Aufidius after he's been banished from Rome, do you meddle with my master, says the third serving man about Coriolanus coming to see Aufidius. And later Aufidius is wooing Coriolanus, is referred to as makes a mistress of him. And Aufidius says he's happier embracing him than he was on his wedding night. It's been said that Coriolanus and Julius Caesar are in the rhetorical rather than the lyrical mode, and both plays are structured around scenes of rhetorical persuasion. So there's a famous scene in Julius Caesar with Antony persuading the mob to sympathize with the title character, and similarly, there's Volumnia in central scene as persuading Coriolanus to veil his intention with the many, and then she has to persuade him to halt his siege of Rome. So there's these central scenes of rhetorical persuasion that are operative. So rhetorical persuasion, so rhetoric, the art of being able to, through speeches, persuade the community, the many, is very important in the political art. To be a political leader is very crucial skill to have, and one that Shakespeare underscored. Shakespeare understands this, underscores that with his great political leaders. Coriolanus seems to lack this. Okay, so and just on this, in the Roman plays, what we see is in Julius Caesar, the tribunes call the plebeians at the very first scene, blocks, stones, you worse than senseless things. But Antony, I think in the play we learn that Antony is correct when you see that they're not stones but men. They have rational capacities. They're able to listen to a speech and be convinced, either through appealing to the reason or appealing to their passions. Either way, they're men that are able to move, so to speak, and be moved through rhetorical speech. Now, the commoners, plebeians, the masses, are often shown in Shakespeare to be, let's say, moved to passionate extremes that can be violent and dangerous. So that is a danger in the political community. The danger that the commoners will, let's say, follow a demagogue to some extreme measure that ends up in violence and in no good. And we see that definitely in the case of Jack Cade, who leads a rebellion in part two of King Henry VI of Shakespeare. But this ability, so there's that danger. However, the ability to sway the commons is absolutely essential for a leader, and let's say lead them to good. And we see that in Henry V most fully. So to continue here, it's a virtue of sorts in the play, but one that Coriolanus decidedly lacks. It's necessary in political life, as I said, and sometimes it's presented as mere flattery or deception, and whatever that may be the case, it may come off in those terms. However, as I said, it's necessary in political life. Sometimes these forms of deception are necessary. There are limits to the power of words. The tale of the belly is ultimately unsuccessful in the first scene. Only the granting of the institution of the tribunate is successful in calming the masses. And similarly, in the final scene, the speeches don't convince Coriolanus. It's really more the deeper connection of blood that can sway him. I'll quickly mention that part of the danger of rhetoric as flattery, as kind of swaying the masses by a demagogue, is that they can come to worship and follow a man like Julius Caesar, and it can lead to a form of a tyrannical authoritarian regime. And however, what we see in Coriolanus is the fact that the commons are not yet at that point of worshiping a demagogic leader. Okay, so they do need a leader skilled in rhetoric to kind of channel them in the proper directions. Coriolanus shows excessive aversion to rhetoric as mere flattery. So he says, Coriolanus would not flatter Neptune for his trident, or love Jove for his power to thunder. So Menenius says that. As I said, this is when this happens, when the commons are led to the point of overstepping their bounds and thinking that they are equal to the nobility, and this can turn to them following a demagogue and leading to violent results. In those cases, we have a loss of what is called in Ulysses' speech in Troilus and Cressida, due degree. Okay, so this is from that speech in Troilus and Cressida, and I think Shakespeare held to this speech. It's a controversial claim. Many scholars would agree with me, many would disagree. However, I think for Shakespeare, this notion that there is an order and a hierarchy in society and the cosmos that can get unstrung and untuned is important. Ulysses says, how could communities, degrees in schools, and brotherhoods in cities, peaceful commerce from dividable shores, the primogenity and due of birth, prerogative of age, crowns, scepters, laurels, but by degree stand in authentic place. So all of these things that are important to us, um, communities, degrees in schools. So someone with a master's degree is, or someone without even an undergraduate degree should not be telling the professor what is true about the work. Peaceful commerce, primogeniture and due of birth, prerogatives of age, all of these have to do with steps of rank and valuation of this is higher than that need to be absolutely secret. Take but degree away, untune that string, and hark what discord follows. Each thing meets in mere oppugnancy. So the other danger with rhetoric is that it can be merely deceptive. And as I said, I think in some cases, deception could be seen as necessary within the realm of the political. And I think Shakespeare was aware of that. And another thing maybe he took from Machiavelli. But Coriolanus cannot adapt himself to this. He's kind of a political idealist in the sense that he doesn't want to compromise on those principles. And this is the crux of the scene in Act 3, Scene 2, where Volumnia is convincing him to get off his high horse and try to make some compromises with people so that they will invest him with the consul, the position of consul, and then afterwards he can renege on all those promises. This is related in Coriolanus's mind to the problem of appearance in reality, a thematic that is often presented in Shakespeare's plays, this what is appearance versus what is reality. And politics is represented as a realm of mere appearances, especially for Coriolanus. For Coriolanus, it's a realm of mere appearances, masks that people wear. And he's not a hypocrite. He will not do that. He will not wear those masks. And just point you to a couple of speeches there where he makes that point, where that point is made about him. And in this scene in Act 3, Scene 2, where he's exchanging with Volumnia on this question, we could say that his objections amount to him being able to say, as does Hamlet, I know not seems. So would you have me false to my nature? Rather say I play the man I am. And he says, you have put me now to such a part which never I shall discharge to the life. And then finally he comes around, he said, okay, but chide me no more. I'll mountebank their love. So mountebank is a noun made out of, a verb made out of this action of mounting a bank, a kind of bank or bench where people would sell their goods or that type of thing. So I'll mountebank their loves. So kind of someone selling, kind of a huckster, someone selling false goods. This is what he sees what he'll have to do. He'll have to kind of be a huckster selling false goods. So I'll stop there at this point, and we'll come back in the next lecture and talk about, connected to this notion of rhetoric, words versus actions. And Coriolanus doesn't want to perform the rhetorical tricks. He just is what he is. So too, he doesn't want to focus on mere words. He's only about action. So thank you very much, and I'll see you at the next lecture.